Muchas gracias por observar este nuevo video. Esta es una serie de videos que hemos estado haciendo basado en la solicitud que ustedes nos han hecho de que quieren que entrevistemos a canadienses. Y como decía, esta es una sociedad que es pluricultural, pluritradicional. Pues entonces ya hemos subido un video a una entrevista que hicimos a una franco-canadiense. El día de hoy vamos a entrevistar a una anglo-canadiense que van a ver que es distinta la costumbre, aparte del idioma, evidentemente. El idioma nativo de esta entrevistada es el inglés, a diferencia de nuestra entrevistada anterior, que hablaba inglés, pero el francés era su lengua nativa. Entonces, evidentemente, la entrevista, como hicimos la vez pasada, va a ser en inglés porque nuestra entrevistada no habla español. Y tal como te comentaba anteriormente, si tú no entiendes la entrevista en inglés, pues bueno, pues tienes que hacer tu tarea porque si quieres venir a Canadá, pues el inglés es idioma oficial en 9 de 10 provincias. De modo que, hello Meg, how's it going?
Not bad. How about you?
Very good. Thank you very much for accepting this interview. It means a lot for me and for my followers in my channel. I've been getting this suggestion, this request for over a year now. For some reason, people are asking me to interview Canadians. So to put it in context, I don't know if you know, but I have a YouTube channel where I talk about Canada, New Brunswick, Fredericton, and the target is people who want to move to Canada. So they ask me questions like, how much you have to pay for internet, how can you get an apartment when you get there, what are the job opportunities out there, and that's the most common question I get. And one of them was like, how are Canadian women? And for answering that question, we have you, a Canadian woman. And I'm gonna ask you some interesting questions for us. And we are going to start with making a contrast with the French Canadian culture. So, but my simple question is, what are the most notorious difference that you find between French Canadian and English Canadian culture?
Well, French Canadian culture has its own culture because they're actually French Canadians.
Mhm.
English Canadians do not have a shared culture. They're just English speaking Canadians. So, like, I'm not English at all. There's no English blood in me. I'm actually Irish and Mi'kmaq, which is the indigenous peoples of this part of the country. So, even though I'm an English speaker, I'm not English.
Yeah, I get you, and that happens a lot. And I haven't realized that, but now that you say that, it's true. So, would you say that you will be able to spot a French Canadian in a public space, other than because he's speaking French? Other than that, do you think you will be able to, if you're in a restaurant, you think you might say, "Oh, those people might be French Canadian"?
For the most part, yeah, because they speak with their hands a lot more than English Canadians.
Yeah.
Like, it's like my grandmother's mother could not speak English. She could only speak French and Mi'kmaq. So, and I actually have a lot of relatives in Quebec who cannot speak French or cannot speak English. So they talk a lot more with their hands and they talk a lot quicker than English
Yeah,
Canadians.
that's true, and I've been told that a lot. Because when I speak Spanish and then when I speak French, I speak faster than when I speak English, and I think that's because of the language itself. Like French pace and Spanish pace is faster. Actually, I get a question asked often. Like when I uploaded the video, the interview of the French Canadian, I made half in French, half in English, and people ask me like, "Is your French better than your English?" And they ask that because when I switched to French, I started speaking faster, and that's not particularly the case because even though French is more natural for me as a Spanish speaker, my English vocabulary is richer because I work in English. I've been speaking English for longer, so I wouldn't say my French is better than my English. I would just say I speak faster when I speak French than when I speak English, just because of the naturality
Yeah.
of the written of the language. In my particular case, my understanding, and you are going to give us your opinion about that. I would say I think that French Canadians usually even dress differently than English Canadian? Do you think that's just a perception of myself, or do you think that's the case?
I think it depends on whether you're talking about North Shore Shiok French or whether you're talking about Montreal.
I'm talking about Montreal, actually.
Because that's more because it's an urban center versus Fredericton, which is actually quite rural, even though it is technically the capital of this province. It's actually the smallest city. It's very rural, and there's 4 surrounding reserves. And the French from this part would dress more rural as well, because they're from really rural places, like 400 or 500 people in a town kind of place. But you go to Montreal, that's a major city, so it would not be any different than how you would dress in, let's say, Toronto.
So do you think people in Montreal, like French Canadian from Montreal, will dress similarly to an Anglophone from Toronto? Do you think that?
Yeah.
My opinion is that if I see a picture of a French Canadian and a picture of an English Canadian, I will say, this one is the French one, this one is the English one. Because, well, especially in women, because, women tend to be more fashionable because men, we dress the same thing everywhere in the world, mostly. But I was in Montreal with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he told me, like, women in Montreal, they dress like in the 90s. And I was looking and kind of realized that's true. I wouldn't say that of people in Toronto, but that might be just a wrong perception. What would you say?
It depends. They usually are both higher up on the fashion chain. So, like, you'll see a bigger difference more in actually men's clothing when you get to the bigger cities. Because you don't see very many men who walk around very GQ in a suit down in New Brunswick. Whereas that is very normal in a big city.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in Toronto.
Yeah. And in Montreal as well.
Not that often, I'll say, in my opinion. Well, depending on where in Montreal you go. It's apparently not where I'm going. Well, also what happened is that Montreal doesn't have like the financial district like they have in Toronto. So if you go to that particular place where the stock market is, of course, or around, you're going to see a lot of guys wearing suits and wearing GQ style clothing. But I don't think, maybe it might be, but I don't think there is an equivalent of formal places being one next to other in Montreal.
It might be depending, like, because I guess it depends on where in the cities you go. Like, my friends who live in Montreal and my friends who live in Toronto both live in the gay villages styles, and that may have to do with the LGBTQ community.
Might be. I also, like, when I go to Montreal, most of the time I spend it in the gay village, just because it is in the heart of downtown Montreal. Like the Berry-UQAM station is the heart of Montreal, because that's the only station where you can take all the lines of the metro station. So that's the heart. And around that area, it's where I move the most, and I haven't seen a lot of GQ style, but might be just my opinion. In your case, as an English-speaking Canadian, a Latino guy, will that give him points? The fact of being Latino, would that subtract points, or would that be neutral for you?
It'd be neutral.
Okay. We in the previous interview we were having, we were talking about French Canadian being often interested in the dancing our dances and learning our language, which is Spanish. Would you say that will be the case with the English-speaking Canadians as well?
With some, yes. With some, no.
Well, we're talking about, of course, there are specific cases. We cannot generalize, but we're talking about the majority. Will you say, like, most English Canadians are interested in learning Spanish or dancing our dances?
The dancing more than the language, I think.
And now I'm going to open the parentheses, because, well, here I live in Fredericton, where 92% of the population is Anglophone, according to the census of 2016. I've been more exposed. I've been surrounded by English speaking, and I'm surprised the lack of interest towards dancing, and it caught my attention. Like the first company I worked for, at the Christmas party, they don't play music at all. So that was really shocking for me, because for me, coming from a Latin country, you cannot imagine a party without music. And in that company, there were more than 100 people, and I will say less than 2% of people danced or were interested in dancing. I will say that in the French Canadians, that will be a higher number. But that's my my micro interpretation of reality.
Now, I've also got that Indigenous lens as well. So dancing is a huge part of our culture. It's how we pray, it's how we celebrate, and that is like the drum is how we make our approach to the creator. It's part of our religion. So music, dancing, all of that, powwows, colors, all that stuff, that's all part of our integral daily life. So, and all of our ceremonies. So if you were to and most Indigenous people are actually English speaking. Very few Indigenous people are French speaking. So I guess as I said, it depends because there's not an English culture. Because it's going to be culture to culture. There are lots of English people speaking people here who are Italian and would be very interested.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And yeah, and talking about that, now that I think about it, English speaking people who are interested in dancing, most of them are not British descendants. Most of them are Irish, like yourself, from the Netherlands, from Scotland.
Other cultures that incorporate dancing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because of course, because Irish, they do incorporate dancing in their culture. That there is a
And the Scottish as well, especially with bagpipes and stuff. So it's very different than sword dance, things like that. So other cultures that have a dance related to their culture, as far as I know, the British don't. They might, but they don't seem to.
Yeah, interesting. So now you expose yourself. You said that you're First Nation. So as a First Nation woman, being a Latino man, would that add points, subtract points, or would that be neutral?
Well, that's where it gets a little bit really complicated, and actually the UN hurts Latino men in this aspect. Because the only way that you can pass on your Indigenous bloodline is through the father in Canada. So if a woman is very wanting her children to have that Indigenous heritage, then a Latino man would be a negative, not because of them as a person, but because of the laws of the country. In general, it wouldn't, but if a woman is very culturally wanting to preserve that culture, which some women are, then they would prefer to have an Indigenous husband because the only way to pass that bloodline down is through a male.
What's your opinion on open relationships?
As long as both people know they're open, then that's okay. If it's only open for one person, then that's not okay.
Have you had any open relationships?
No.
Would you be interested in having one?
I mean, at this point, I'm open to different things. Again, like if it was with a partner who I trusted, then I would be okay with that.
In the Latin culture, there is something that is kind of normal for us. Women, some of them like it, some of them don't. Some of them find it scary. Catcalling in Latin America is very common. So, like you being a white female, like if you go to any country in Latin America, people are gonna start calling you. Will say, "You're beautiful." Hello, give me your phone number, stuff like that. That can be scary for someone, while other women find that interesting and flattering. What's your opinion on that?
It depends on what's actually being said, how it's being said, and the actual context. In Latin America, it probably wouldn't bother me because I'd probably be drinking lots of tequila. In Canada, it would depend on context, what was actually being said. Sometimes it can be really scary, and also from the Indigenous side, there's a lot of extra fear around the missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is a cultural genocide that's going on here. So when you're someone who you're in the high risk that if someone were to attack you, that the police are not going to do anything about it, then you're going to be more reactive to that. Not necessarily fear. I mean, I have seen people catcall Indigenous women out in Edmonton, and Indigenous women stab them.
Whoa. Okay.
So it depends, like I'm talking more Winnipeg, Edmonton, whatever. But yeah, so it can be a really dangerous thing depending on what the guy is saying and depending on how much fear the woman is under.
Well, let's talk about jealousy. Do you consider yourself a jealous person?
No.
Okay, now let's talk for the English-speaking Canadians. Do you think English-speaking Canadians are jealous people? Women, talking about women, of course.
Well, a lot of women are. My advice to most women who are really jealous is you're that jealous and you don't trust the person you're with, then you should just find someone who you do trust or deal with your own issues. Because I see jealousy more as a reflection of you either not trusting the person that you're dealing with or of you being insecure in yourself.
One complaint I receive a lot from Latin folks is that their partners don't allow them to hang out with their friends as much as they like. For instance, if someone goes to watch a football match with their friends, by someone I mean your boyfriend in a hypothetical context, would you be mad? Would you be like, oh, you already hung out with them 4 days ago, what you doing?
It depends. At the beginning of a relationship, you kind of like people to be around more, but I've had some very long-term relationships, and honestly around the 8-year mark it's like, yeah, bye. But I don't think it's healthy to not spend time with friends for either party. Like, it's not healthy.
What do you think of sex on the first date for English Canadian women?
I think that that's a really divisive thing. There's women who are really for it and feel very empowered actually by it, and then there's women who are very against it. It's more woman to woman, but it's a very polarizing topic.
Okay, talking about polarizing topics, but moving to a way softer one. In our culture in Latin America, when it comes to pay the bill at the restaurant or when we go out, the cultural tradition is that men always pay the bill. Even if you are my friend, like if there is a man and a woman who go out, even as a friend, the expectation is the man to pay always. If you don't, there might be cases of men who don't do it. It's bad seen, and that woman will think he's stingy. And I've seen this a lot, where woman gets really angry, really upset, and don't ever talk again to that person, even though they are just friends. Would that be the case in Canada? What's your opinion on that?
Okay, no, that would not be the case in Canada. No one would expect a platonic friend to pay for everything. Usually the first 1 to 3 dates, the man should pay if he can afford to, just to kind of show some chivalry. But also, we're in a not great economic time here, so that's not always possible. So women are also understanding of that here as well.
Say the hypothetical case that where you go out with a guy on a first date and he doesn't pay, would that be a reason for not calling him or not reaching out ever again?
No, that would be if you genuinely like the person. Like, the bill is kind of like the last thing you worry about early on a date, like, because you're trying to assess personality compatibility, value compatibility, and a whole bunch of other things way before you're even really thinking about the bill. But like, it again depends on where you live in Canada as well. Because if you're out west, which I did live for the last 5 years in Edmonton, it would be very like, for a man to not pay would be very odd, because the differentials in pays between men and women there is the average woman's making about $50,000 a year, whereas the average man's making around 200,000.
Damn, I didn't know that.
So you should be paying when you're making that much more money.
That surprises me because I have friends who still says that in countries like Canada, that payment inequality between women and men don't exist, and of course that exists everywhere in the world, even today.
It doesn't if you're doing the same job, but when the oil industry kind of inflates things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're working in a business job, pretty much anywhere in Canada, you're going to make about the same amount of money. But once you get into trades, oil and stuff, and that's at a boom, then those guys are making sometimes $80 to $100 an hour. But that's so in that particular province, like in Alberta, the man would be expected to pay. Now you go across the Rockies into the place before that, British Columbia. In British Columbia, where people are much more feminist, it would be equal pay.
I would say in Quebec as well, it's a very feminist province.
Yes, and in Quebec, probably there more Quebec women, I would assume, would pay their half of the bill.
So you were talking about the things that you worry about on a date, on the first date when you're meeting someone. So let's decode that together. So what are the the red flags? What are the not to do things? What things are good indicators? What things are bad indicators? But what are the common mistakes that guys do when they go out on their first date?
Guys who want you to meet their grandparents after the first date, that's weird.
Okay.
Being like super clean. Getting really drunk.
Wait, getting super clean is a bad thing? How can that be a bad thing?
Super clean? Like you meet them once and then within like between the time you've left the coffee shop and you've gotten home, you've gotten 17 messages.
I definitely misunderstood. I thought you said clean as a,
No,
as a
clean
clean
good.
person.
Clingy, bad.
Clingy. Oh, that's a word I don't know. So can you inform
Okay.
us, Latin people, what the cling word means?
Needy. Very
Okay, needy. How do you spell the other word, the cling thing? It's
CLINGY.
okay, cool. Yeah, needy. Don't be needy, guys. Okay, now I got you. And being clean is not bad. Be as clean as you can.
Good.
But not clean. Clean. Yeah, that's an issue for us, the Spanish speakers, because we don't have a lot of different vowel sounds, so it's hard for us to distinguish between the pronunciation of cling and clang. So
yeah, so that one little word can throw off what I'm talking about. But yeah, no, very different things. Other first date things, being too aggressive. From my experience, there's a lot of guys out there who are very violent towards women. I've noticed, especially in the Fredericton area, where they will not let you, if they were to drive you home from the coffee, for example, they won't let you out of the car. They'll lock the door.
damn.
So there's been a few times like where to get someone's hands off of me, I've had to
Has that happened to you?
punch them.
Damn, has that actually happened to you?
Yeah.
Damn, that's fucked up.
If you're someone who's very persistent or maybe someone who's too handsy, then sometimes like that cannot cross over well culturally, because if you're talking to someone who's had an experience like what I've just described, and then you're someone who's, very touchy, then that like PTSD kind of mindset can come out, and then the woman can feel like you're like that guy.
So other than being aggressive, what else? It's a not to do.
Be on your phone the whole time.
Oh, I guess nowadays that's kind of often, right?
Yeah, well, if you can't put it like in your like pocket for like half an hour while you have coffee, like
Yeah.
because if I'm just gonna be like sitting there with someone else on their phone, I could have like stayed home, like, and just like talk to you over like text message or whoever over text message. Like there was no need for me to leave my house. Hitting on a waitress while you're on a date with a woman.
I can't believe that could even happen.
It does. Yeah. That's usually not great either. Yeah, I could go on like a very big list of what not to do. The biggest things are just don't be clingy and don't be a creep.
Yeah, that's the summary. What advice would you give to Latino folks for conquering Canadians?
You have a really sexy accent. You're sexy people. You don't have to try that hard.
So our production team is making us some signals. We are running out of time, so we have to wrap it up. So what words you have for the end of this interesting interview?
Thank you, Friends of Ray, for listening to me. I don't know why you want to, but anyways, see ya.
So if there is any questions that I forgot or I did not ask, just write it down in this comment box below, and Megan is going to answer your questions because she's that cool. Thank
I
you.
will.
Thank you very much, Megan, and thank you, folks, for watching this video. Si te gustó, dale click a manita arriba, compártelo, suscríbete y dale a la campanita para que te lleguen las notificaciones cada vez que subimos un nuevo video. Hasta la próxima.